Okay, chapter 5, Earth's atmosphere. So we just got done talking about the water cycle and how water gets cycled on Earth here, and now we're going to move into the atmosphere, which, as we know from the water cycle, plays a role in the water cycle. So 5.1 is kind of like our introduction into Earth's atmosphere. So Earth's atmosphere is a layer of gases that surrounds the planet. It is really awesome because it protects and supports life. Now, sometimes when we draw pictures, you guys see pictures, it'll make the atmosphere look like it's bigger than it actually is. Really, in all reality, um, this is an actual picture from space. When you look at it, it really is quite small, quite thin in comparison to the entire Earth there. So it does a lot of things, and we're going to get into this chapter, all of the things that it does, but really overall, two broad scoping terms there, it protects and it supports life. So what's in it? So these gases that we call air are made up of 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen. There's some trace other gases, things like argon and a few other things. But for the most part, there's the big two. So 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen. And when you think about those two things, we're going to talk about nitrogen here in a little bit. When we breathe that nitrogen in, we're not doing anything with that. Nothing with that. The oxygen, we all know we need that oxygen to survive. It's helping our cells do its cellular processes to keep us alive. But 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen. Our atmosphere has not always been like this. If you look at this picture here, the right-hand side of the graph, way right-hand side of the graph is where we are at now. So when you look at that, you can see how oxygen just kind of came into the picture about 2.5 billion years ago. When you think about what happened 2.5 billion years ago, where do we get oxygen from, right? Where do we get it from? We get it from plants, right? So kind of clues you into the fact of when plants really kind of came into existence here on Earth. You'll also notice some of those other things. Carbon dioxide decreased since the beginning of time. Nitrogen has also decreased, obviously. Also used to be more water in the atmosphere than there currently is, and methane as well. So just kind of big picture stuff here. Just keep in mind our atmosphere, the way it is now, has not always been that way. It has changed. The other thing about our atmosphere, it has just the right balance between mass and place from the sun or distance from the sun. So when I compare the inner planets, which are Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, and we look at those inner planets and just talk quickly about do they have an atmosphere, Mercury does not have an atmosphere. It's too small. In order to hang on to an atmosphere, a planet has to be big enough, it's got to have enough gravity. Big enough and have enough gravity to hang on to those gases, and Mercury just is not big enough to hang on to those gases. Venus has an atmosphere. It's primarily carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is what we call a greenhouse gas, which means it's great at trapping heat, and that is one of the reasons Venus is the hottest destination in our entire solar system. Venus is really, really hot. So it's that atmosphere made mainly of the gas carbon dioxide. Earth, we all know we have an atmosphere since we're in a chapter all about it, and it is just right for life, mostly nitrogen and oxygen, as we just saw. And then finally, our last inner planet, we have Mars. It does have an atmosphere, so it is big enough to hang on to gases, but its atmosphere is also mainly carbon dioxide. It's farther away, so it is much cooler than Venus is, but also mostly carbon dioxide. Now, these air molecules in our atmosphere, all of these nitrogen and oxygen molecules, have pressure on Earth's surface. And those gas molecules closest to Earth's surface are packed really tightly together. So if you look at this picture here, it kind of shows you the difference there, whereas the gas molecules nearest the Earth's surface are going to be closest together. The ones up top are going to be much farther apart from each other. So atmospheric pressure is highest near the Earth's surface. Pressure is just the force per unit area of anything. So even if we're talking about water pressure, that's what pressure is, force per unit area. So atmospheric pressure is highest near the Earth's surface because gravity is pulling it down towards Earth. So air pressure is greatest near the Earth's surface. However, if you look at density, look at the density of the air molecules, they are less dense farther away from the Earth, and then more dense closest to the Earth. So atmospheric pressure decreases with increasing altitude. So altitude is how far we are above sea level. So altitude is how far we are above sea level. So as you go up, when I increase altitude, atmospheric pressure is going to decrease. And they have an airplane on there. They're kind of showing you where those fly at, but airplanes have a tool on them called an altimeter, and that altimeter will actually use air pressure to help the airplane understand where it is off the ground. Is it higher up in the ground? Is it lower down in the ground? But that's what that altimeter actually does. So atmospheric pressure decreases with increasing altitude. So just think about that. The higher up you go, the less air pressure is going to be. Here's just another picture showing us that. Can't get enough pictures of this. Air molecules are closest together near Earth's surface. You're going to have higher air pressure. Further away from Earth's surface, they're farther apart, so air pressure is lower. So at sea level, the weight of the column of air above a person is actually about 9,800 newtons. And I know we haven't dealt with that a lot, but that is actually the standard unit for weight in the metric system. So I also threw pounds on there because we all know pounds. 2,200 pounds. Think of that. That means when you are standing at sea level, there is about 2,200 pounds of air pressure pushing down on you. Now they're showing you a car there to give you kind of an example. Why don't we feel that? Because we are used to it. Because we are used to it. Our body has been designed for it. Our skin, everything, all that's been designed for it. That's why if you go somewhere else where you don't have that air pressure pushing down on your body doesn't kind of know what to do with it and is not going to survive. So that 2,200 pounds is about the weight of a small car when you think about it. So we're used to it. We're just not used to thinking of it that way. So air is pushing even down on us. So how do we measure pressure? The tool that we use to measure pressure is called a barometer. So an instrument that measures atmospheric pressure. Why do we measure air pressure? Because it is a huge indicator for changing weather. And guess what? We're talking about the next chapter, weather. So the barometer tells us when the air pressure is going up and when the air pressure is going down. A long time ago, they used to use mercury barometers, kind of like what you see in the left-hand side there. Mercury is an element. It's actually a metal that at room temperature, it's a liquid. Really cool, looks really cool, but also really toxic. So we don't really use it anymore. So what would happen is if air pressure increases, as you would see like in that dish there, it would actually cause the mercury to go up in the tube. Whereas if the air pressure decreases, the mercury in the tube would actually go down. And that's really kind of how it worked. Really simple, easy device. Now we use other things since we can't use mercury anymore, but that's what a barometer is, and we still have them. And like I said, they're really helpful because they help tell us what's going on with the weather. So we have a lot of different pressure measurements that we use. So this is one of the big ones. We use it a lot in weather. It's called millimeters of mercury. That Hg is actually the chemical symbol for mercury right off the periodic table. So when you see mm of Hg, you say millimeters of mercury. So even though we don't use mercury anymore, we've still hung on to the units. We use also things called pascals, ATMs, not the kind you get the money out of, but atmospheres. And then if you've ever had to air up a tire before, you're probably familiar with PSI or pounds per square inch. So all of those are units of pressure. You can use them to measure pressure. Just depends upon what you're measuring. Like if you're going to do your tires, it's going to be in PSI. It's not going to be in millimeters of mercury. If we're doing weather, it's going to be in millimeters of mercury and not PSI. Oop, and another one there, we have torr that pops up too. There's even more. There's tons more. I just chose to put 5 on the slide here. So since mercury is poisonous or a toxic liquid, we use what's called aneroid barometers today. I kind of grew up, my grandparents had one of these at their house. So I always thought, how can that tell if it's going to storm, rain, it's going to be nice outside? Because it had a barometer in it. And like I said, barometers are a huge indicator as to what's going to happen with the weather. Is it going to rain? Is it going to snow? All of those things. So really nice tool. Finally, last thing. So our atmosphere is 78% nitrogen. You're breathing it in. We're not doing anything with the nitrogen that we're breathing in. However, nitrogen is very important. It is important to build proteins in our body. It's also found in the tissues of all living things. It's also found in our DNA. It's really important. So how do we get it if we don't get it when we breathe it in? So nitrogen, just like water goes through a cycle, nitrogen also goes through a cycle. So nitrogen is cycled through the soil and into plants, and finally when living things die and decay. So when you see what's going on in the picture here, plants have bacteria in their roots in the soil that we call it fixed nitrogen. It takes the nitrogen up, and then either an animal eats the plant and you eat the animal, or you eat the plant. So we get our nitrogen from eating. That's how we get our proteins. And when you think about proteins, all the rave now, how do you get proteins? You know, we know that we can get it from eating any sort of meat, like cows, chickens, but there's also plant-based proteins also. So you think, well, how does a vegetarian get proteins? Because there's plant-based proteins. There's things like legumes or soy. There are other ways to get protein. You don't have to get it necessarily from an animal. And then once the plant decomposes, or once the animal decomposes and goes back into the ground, the cycle starts all over again. So that is the nitrogen cycle. Okay, so that is 5.1, kind of just an introduction to our atmosphere. So it's important, it helps protect us, and it's made of 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen. All right, if you guys have any questions, or when you go to take your assessment, make sure you get your book open and use your notes to take that assessment.